Okay, this is a video response to YouHadMeAtHayek and all of his videos on the topic of feminism and men's rights.
And this is my last address to you people, you misogynistic, backwards, anti-feminist, barbarian douchebags.
Am I a barbarian, a misogynist, a douchebag, a feminist? You can decide. I'm not going to label myself. You are quite right to point out that you can't directly observe patriarchy. It's just a concept. Patriarchy is not an observable fact. It's an explanatory model that feminists rely on. Just like gravity. You can observe falling objects, you can observe the planets rotating around the sun. That could be your evidence for gravity, but it's not gravity itself. It's also a word that means different things to different people. Feminists say that there is evidence for patriarchy. So here are the facts. Number one, most politicians and most CEOs are male. Number two, males earn more money than females do. Number three, males use violence against women. These are all facts. Nobody disputes these facts. But they're cherry-picked. And they're delivered to give you the impression that patriarchy is real, is the explanation, or it's a real thing. The problem is that feminists get to you first. They get to penetrate the virgin minds of the public before anyone else has a chance to present them with the other side. So, supposing you didn't hear any of those facts, and instead the first thing you heard was, most of the homeless population, most of the population that's in prison are male. Or that women spend the majority of disposable income and have the majority of spending power. And you heard also that females use violence against men. Then what would you think? The problem is, if you already have this idea of patriarchy in your head, then these facts will just seem, well, yeah, okay, to sort of confirm what you already believe. Oh yeah, sure, it's patriarchy's fault that most people in prison are male, or whatever. It's patriarchy's fault that women spend more money. And, of course, when women are violent against men, it's just self-defense. Men's rights activists, such as myself, don't believe in patriarchy theory. We don't think that things are that simple. We don't think that men have all the power and women don't. But if you really want to know the difference between men's rights activists and feminists, and if you want to lump us all together, that's fine. You can do that. But we're still going to disagree with you. For strategic reasons, men's rights activists don't label themselves as feminists for the most part. This whole argument about what we should call ourselves, on the one hand, it's really boring, but on the other hand, it's actually kind of important. So, what I want to do in this video is just get across to you what I think the main differences between feminists and men's rights activists really are. The main difference is, if you ask, do gender roles have a purpose or not? Feminists will answer in the affirmative, yes they do, they have a purpose. And men's rights activists will say no. Because feminists think that gender roles function as part of supporting the patriarchy. The patriarchy requires gender roles to function. And that's why they're there, to maintain the status quo, to maintain the patriarchy. Unlike feminists, men's rights activists generally do not think that gender roles serve a purpose. They're not a cog in the machine. They're not there for any reason. What they are basically is a result of competition within each sex. And the fact that most people are heterosexual and each sex has a different target market. So we're each marketing ourselves to different people who have different preferences. And what females want in males and what males want in females tends to be different on average. And knowing that, we each, construct our identity accordingly. So, while feminists and men's rights activists will agree that gender roles are performative, that they're fake, that they're, socially constructed, they won't agree on why that is or what role they play. And that there's more to it than just dominance and submission. We don't believe that the male role is the dominant role and the female role is the submissive role. So, whereas feminists will focus on that for the most part. So what it boils down to is we all conform to what we think is normal, and we all respond to what we think the opposite sex is expecting and what they want. And that's what creates these gender roles. Heterosexuality is what creates these gender roles. And competition. It's not what feminists think it is, which is they think it's keeping people in their place, maintaining a social order, maintaining a ruling elite in their position of power. Right? That's where I think it's wrong. The second question that men's rights activists and feminists differ on would be, can you be on top if you're on the bottom? Men's rights activists would say no, and feminists would say yes. What this disagreement boils down to is an understanding of, or assumptions pertaining to statistical analysis. So if you find that males end up on top in some ability or attribute, could it be intelligence or it could be any skill set. The thing is, males and females are very different in the sense that males are the more diverse and variable sex. They tend to be less conformist, they tend to be more specialized, they tend to take risks, and that means that as a group, they're more dispersed. So you'll find more men at the top, and you'll find more men at the bottom. And you'll find women tend to end up in the middle. Women are the mediocre sex. So, just because you find men at the top doesn't mean that men are on top. Really, all it is this is an artifact of the fact that you have lots of people to choose from. And because men tend to specialize, they tend to become the best. They tend, the saying, master of, jack of all trades, master of none. Women tend to be more balanced and more normal and more mediocre, on average. It's a feminine trait. Men tend to go more towards excellence or spectacular failure. And they take risks. Which means, obviously, if you take a risk, you're going to be more likely to end up at the top or at the bottom. So, that's the second part that's the second question that really separates men's rights activists from feminists. The third would be, why should we care? Why should we care about inequality or equality. Feminists always stick to this model of which they borrow from the cultural Marxist model of you have one group versus another group competing for status and power. And the way they look at why people should care is because women should care because their interests are at stake. They really see themselves as in competition with men for status and power in society. And men's rights activists don't look at it as a gender struggle or class struggle or, intertribal warfare or any kind of a conflict. We all share the same collective interest. You can't separate men and women. What's good for women is good for men. What's good for men is good for women. There isn't a zero-sum game. If you're a feminist, you'll think, yeah, there is a zero-sum game. If you're a men's rights activist, you'll see that there isn't. We all benefit from clear and consistent rules. And when the best person for the job is allowed to get the job, right? Which brings me to a comment something you said in your video, which was basically that under patriarchy, men are dominant and in charge because they're believed to be more capable to rule. So you think that there's a widespread belief that men are better decision makers than women. I don't see it that way. However, I do think there's a widespread belief that men are active and women are passive. But that has nothing to do with patriarchy. That wouldn't support patriarchy. It's a very different claim. It's a very different idea. Which I think could easily be confused with the idea that men are better decision makers. Think about this. When things go well, feminists usually look for a female or feminism to give credit to. They aren't going to give credit to a man as likely. But when things go wrong, feminists are quick to blame a man or society for being too patriarchal. So that's basically the feminist paradigm. Men are good, or women are good, men are bad. And it's the ruling paradigm. And since feminists are activists, they tend to focus on the negatives. They tend to focus on the problems. So they're really big on male bashing, demonizing men, and to make that possible, they also infantilize women like crazy. Given that that's the situation, given that that's the ruling paradigm, and given that that's the feminist paradigm, how do you think men's rights activists feel when they object to that? And what they get from so-called feminists is people saying, well, you're objecting to the belief that women are weak and men are powerful, and that's patriarchy. So what you're really objecting to is patriarchy. You see how that goes? Men's rights activists, by and large, oppose the demonization of men and males and the infantilization of females. And that's not the same as opposing patriarchy. It really has nothing to do with patriarchy. It's everything to do with feminist activism and the strategies that they've chosen to get people interested and get people involved and make the changes that they want to see, which aren't necessarily progressive or good, and which aren't usually, well, pretty much always, the changes that men's rights activists want to see.